Welcome to the Plein Air Podcast from Plein Air Magazine. I'm your host, Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. This is our very first weekly podcast where we delve into the world of outdoor painting, called plein air painting. For those of you who don't know, plein air is a French term that essentially means out of doors or open air. The French pronounce it plein air, others pronounce it plein air, but no matter what you call it, there's a huge movement of artists around the world who are going outdoors to paint. And this show is all about the movement, the painters, the collectors, the galleries, and of course, the art. This podcast is brought to you by the Plein Air Convention, taking place this coming April in Tucson, Arizona. More about that later. It's my personal goal to see more people fall in love with plein air painting. So I hope you'll share this show with your friends, tell a friend, share it on social media, email a link or whatever. And of course, we hope you'll subscribe. And we're going to strive to get this out for you every single week. I'm extremely excited about today's show. You're going to have to listen more than once to this one because we're going to explore ideas about life as a painter and discuss the techniques of painting with legendary plein air artist Matt Smith. But before we get into Matt's interview, I am extremely excited to tell you about the Plein Air Convention. This is an incredible event where painters come from all over the world, 15, 20 countries, plus every state in the Union. We get together and we laugh and we have fun and we paint together and we play and we learn. We have instructors. So we have a huge number of instructors. We have some of the best painters in the world coming in, names that are the rock stars of painting. And you can come in and learn from them, watch their demonstrations on one of 4 stages in watercolor, oil, pastel, urban sketching, even some figurative and portraiture. This is a wonderful chance to enhance yourself as a painter. We begin with basics courses, so those of you who don't know plein air painting can learn the basics and the materials, and then we go out painting every single day. And we have field instructors, some of the faculty members who go out and work with you. They're very accessible. They love helping people. They love helping anybody. Anybody can come at any level, whether you're a beginner or you're an experienced pro. Everybody gets something out of it. We have orientation classes so that you can meet people. If you don't know anybody, we put people together. People have told me they've made some of their best friends ever from those groups where we put people together. One couple is even getting married as a result of it, so that's pretty cool. Anyway, there's so much more. I can't tell you about it now. We don't have time. We've got to get to the Matt Smith interview. But if you go to pleinairconvention.com, you can learn more. Remember, the early bird pricing expires February 14th. That is Valentine's Day. It's going to be a huge convention. We've got 100 more than last year already registered. We could sell out. You want to get in and get your seats right away. pleinairconvention.com. So now let's go to our interview, our very first podcast interview with Matt Smith. Matt is a rock star painter. He has become a legend in painting circles and collecting circles. He lives out in Arizona, and he has won just about every award you can imagine. He is a member of the premium plein air group, the Plein Air Painters of America, and he is an absolutely incredible thinker and an incredible teacher, and he is driven to see people grow as painters. So let's get started. Hey, we have Matt Smith on the line. Matt, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So glad that we had a chance to finally get together on this. I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about your career and about the world of plein air painting, and then I want to kind of learn about how to become a better painter. And I thought you'd be just the guy to talk to for that.
Well, given that I'm working on all that, I suppose I might be.
So, why don't we start out with how this all began for you? How did you become a plein air painter?
Well, like probably everybody in your audience, I never stopped drawing. You know, we all learned at a very early age that with a crayon or pencil in hand and a piece of paper in front of us, we see a direct response to what we're doing, and we get very excited about that. It's always fun to see kids when they come up to you and they bring their drawings, which are perhaps a little confusing to you, but to then they're so crystal clear and they're so excited about it, and they see it as a form of communication. Well, I never stepped away from it. I just continued to draw often, and even watercolor paint when I was in grade school and then in high school, and just for the pure fun of it, just because I enjoyed the process. Even though most of the instructors were starting to push us away from that kind of thing, it's probably even worse now.
So did you envision a life of being an artist?
Not really. My parents were collectors to some degree, and they occasionally would have artist friends over, so I was exposed to the fact that you could actually do that for a living, but I never really thought I'd be able to do that. I just pursued it as a form of enjoyment.
Would we know the names of any of the artist friends they had over?
No.
Okay.
No, they were mostly regional, local people. One was in Laguna Beach, a fellow by the name of Armin Gasparian. Some of the locals still know, but I haven't seen or heard from him or of him in years. But it was just the point that somebody could actually do that for a living, could enjoy what they're doing so much and actually make a living at it. So I continued to draw, and in high school, my father was a businessman working with Motorola, and he had 2 assignments in Europe, and one of them was in Geneva, Switzerland when I was in high school, and that's where I sold my first painting. They were kind of these funny watercolors of, Native American portraits that were as much out of my mind as anything. I was buying all the books I could to read on the plains, cultures, and that kind of thing. And that sort of opened my eyes to, wait, maybe there is something here, and you can make a living at it. So that encouraged me to enroll as an art student at Arizona State University and get my degree in painting. And just kind of went from there. From there, I got out, started with galleries, and never looked back.
So, what was the experience like at the art school back in that era? Because so many art schools were focused on modernism and abstract painting. Was that what they were exposing you to, or did they actually have traditional painting?
It was just like you described. It was a typical university system where most of the work, the focus and direction was conceptual work and abstract work. And it was very disappointing. It's funny because you enter these schools and they have all the right classes, beginning drawing, beginning painting, color theory, design, and all of that. But as soon as you get into those classes, you quickly realize something's not right here. They're not teaching me the fundamentals. And that was an issue. At the same time, I'm looking at the work of James Reynolds and Edgar Payne and these really great representational painters. I'm thinking, okay, that's sort of the direction I ultimately would like to go in, but I'm not getting any of that here. It was so frustrating for me that I left ASU and went up to NAU for a year, which is Northern Arizona University, and it was pretty much the same thing. So I came back down to ASU and went a couple of more semesters, and then I saw over at Phoenix College, Merrill Mahaffey was teaching, and he's a somewhat representational artist. So I thought, well, I'll go try that out, and that was a good thing because he really opened my eyes to the fundamentals and structure and working from life, and that was a huge thing. He even offered me a job working as an assistant in his studio, which was a grand experience.
So you say working from life. In that particular case, was that landscape or was that figure?
It was a landscape, but he was also teaching a life drawing class. That was the one thing. The one positive I got through all of this was life drawing, because it was always from a live model.
So if you had to do it all over again, if you were talking to a young person who maybe is listening to this and they're kind of trying to figure out how do they, really make sure they get the right education and the right principles, what would you do differently? What would you tell them to do?
Find a decent art school, and there are more and more of them popping up. There are ateliers here in this country that are popping up that teach you, the language of painting, so that when you do have something to say, you can say it clearly and professionally. I would look for that. I would look for a school that absolutely focuses on the fundamentals of drawing, value, design, and color, and teaches you that from the ground up. And once you have those tools, you're ready to go.
So, as a landscape painter, do you recommend them doing figurative drawing?
Absolutely. Any of it will help you. The basic for all of us in terms of subject matter is a human a figure in portraiture. It's something we can relate to and we understand visually to the point where we know if it's right or wrong. And by live drawing and live painting, it'll develop hand-eye coordination, and it was a huge benefit for me. As a matter of fact, when I was in school, early on, my focus was figure and portraiture. But I quickly realized that I didn't want to spend a life doing commissioned portraits and having people tell me, can you, in my case, make my nose a little smaller and give me a little more hair, whatever it was.
Something's, as Sargent would say, something's wrong with the mouth. So the era, give us a feel for the era when you were kind of in school or coming out of school. Would that have been, the 70s?
Mid-'80s. I
Mid-'80s.
graduated ASU in 85.
Okay.
And I walked away from class, Eric, and I never looked back. I never went back to formally accept my degree. I'll never forget walking from that last class in my car thinking, now what am I going to do? I've got nothing.
So what did you do?
Well, I spent a tremendous amount of time working on my own. I know workshops are quick and short, but I took several workshops from artists I greatly respected, and they at least opened my eyes and pointed me in the right direction, and I ran with that. I went to every museum I could. I looked at as much great work as I could and dissected that as I was looking at it, and I learned so much by doing that. And I became friends with several other artists who I admire, Ralph Oberg being one of them, and traveled and painted a lot with him, and that sort of communication about what we're doing when we're in the field was a huge help.
So I think a lot of people who came into this world of plein air more recently don't realize how little of it there was going on at the time. And I think there are some who assume that it started with Monet and it just continued. This movement that we're seeing today did not exist at the level that it exists now when you were first painting. Is that right?
You're absolutely right. Not even close.
So what was it like then?
Well, I'd call up my buddies in town like Ray Roberts or somebody and say, hey, you want to go painting? And we knew exactly what it was. The whole term plein air wasn't being thrown about. And we'd go out and spend a day in the field and rarely or never saw anybody else painting. And it was understood in our world that was a necessary means to an end of understanding your subject, how natural light affects your subject, how to develop your craft. It was all so exciting, Eric. So new and exciting.
So I'd be interested to hear your perspective. You kind of started in that early era of the resurgence of the plein air movement, and now it's grown just massively. It's just huge, and I'm sure with that come pros and cons. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are your feelings about this?
The pros are that it opens everybody's eyes to what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. Working from a direct observation is absolutely fundamental to developing as an artist. Not only the craft end of it, but again, understanding your subject. And the trick for us is we can't hire a model to come into our studio. We can't bring it in. So out we go. We have to move our studio into the field. And once you get a grasp on that, it's a very exciting part of it. But you learn your subject. You learn your craft. The cons are that I want to be careful how I say this.
Oh, you don't need to be careful. You're not going to offend anybody.
It has to do with a lot of the shows. There seems to be a carnival festival atmosphere to it that I don't think is beneficial. I take what I do in the field very seriously, and I don't like start and stop sessions and whistles and deadlines and other than, the changing light. And it has to be done. You have to work in this area or that area. So so people can see you. So there's a certain amount of misinformation that's out there in regards to those shows and some of what's happening that's disturbing or alarming, but that's okay, because those of us that really know what's going on, we can help people understand what that is and how to remedy it.
So what would you change if you could change anything about the current environment?
It would probably be, there seems to be a kind of, sort of, for lack of a better term, a circuit that people travel going from one show to another to another. And I don't think that's positive, because I'm seeing so many of these young artists. They're so good, and they're really limiting themselves by doing that. If they would spread out and get involved with some of the galleries and the shows, and understand that many of these field paintings are a means to an end. In other words, a more developed studio painting that they can take to the better shows, it would help them tremendously. And ultimately, I think they'll realize that. But the sooner the better.
Well, I think it provides a lot of opportunity. You know, a lot of artists have to teach. A lot of artists have to be on the circuit and hope to sell as many paintings as they can, so that they can get out of their dead-end jobs and paint full-time, or some of them do paint full-time, and it gives them an opportunity. But I think we all have to be very careful about making sure that quality always reigns and is, you know, on top. One thing I'd be curious about, how many major studio pieces do you produce in a typical year?
You know, I don't keep a track of that, Eric, and you know my work, and you know me. I don't do a lot of very large paintings, and it's because I can't, personally, I don't feel that I can get the surface quality, the look that I want, and I want to maintain that. And for me, there's no direct relationship between size and quality. I just want quality. Now, there are other artists out there who are absolutely phenomenal painters when it comes to consistently painting large paintings. Bill Anton and Clyde Aspavig and Scott Christensen and Ray Roberts is doing some phenomenal work. That's who they are, and they can do that. With me, I have to scale it down, but I'll refer to it as finished studio work, probably 50 paintings a year.
Yeah. Well, that's quite a few, actually. I was talking to George Carlson, and George is producing probably less than 10, maybe less than 7 paintings a year, and really spending a lot of time on them, weeks and weeks and weeks on those paintings, and has managed to put himself in a position where he's gotten the price of those paintings up so that he's not being seduced by all the things that we all get seduced by, so that he can really focus on quality. Have you found that to be the case for you in terms of being able to get your prices up so that you can really produce the quality you need, or is it's not about time?
It hasn't been, and by the way, George Carlson is one of the great painters of our time. The man is brilliant. The way he layers that paint and builds those surfaces, they're just, it's a whole nother level of beauty in and of itself. With me, it's been quality, and again, that's why I've kept to a fairly small scale. I felt that my need to do the best work that I could do was happening on a smaller scale like that. And part of that goes back to my early days working in the field. I forced myself early on, Eric, to bring a level of finish to these plein air pieces that would allow me to put them in galleries when I was done using them in the studio, or maybe just send them directly to the galleries from the studio. And I liked that sort of that painterly quality I was able to get. I wanted to maintain that in the studio as well. It was just difficult to take it to the larger scale for me. I'm starting to do that more and more and develop my surfaces more and more and take more time on the painting. And to answer your question, yes, bringing higher prices allows me to slow down to do that more.
So how do you define quality? If you were going to teach these people that are listening about what they need to be thinking about, what quality is in your mind, is that something you can articulate, or is it something you can only show us on a painting?
I can show you on a painting. To verbalize it would be very difficult. I think everybody out there knows it when they see it. For me, it has to be grounded at least in some degree in reality. You get into the abstract art and you begin to lose that ability to communicate with your viewer. That's an issue. So it has to be grounded in reality. These artists have to understand, myself included, the fundamentals and how they apply not only to our craft but to our subject as well. And then we need to develop our own personal style and technique, as James Reynolds would always call it, and build that surface quality that makes your artwork interesting above and beyond the subject. And that's something as artists that we see and we respect. If you look at many of the art shows, when they have the Artist's Choice Award and the People's Choice Award or the Collector's Choice, they're two wildly different paintings.
Yeah, the Artist's Choice never sells, and every artist wants to do a swap for that painting because it's the most awesome painting there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Patron's Choice Award goes to the most rendered painting or the most subject-oriented, little girl holding a puppy with a tear in her eye or something.
So, well, there's a fine balance there, though, because if you're painting things that only artists love, you're not going to make a living as a painter. How do you deal with that?
Well, first by acknowledging it, just like you did, and understanding that. I mean, we can be purists to the point where we'll starve to death, and that's one of the problems that artists deal with frequently. Is they're so personally involved with their work that they lose the understanding of the business end of it. In my personal life, when a painting is finished, I remove it from my studio and put it in a separate viewing room, and now it's a whole different ball game. Now it's business, and I try not to let what's happening in the viewing room influence what's happening in the studio, and vice versa. This way, I keep my mind clean. I do paintings that I want to do. I can have some degree of understanding of, okay, this particular gallery is never going to sell a painting of the Sonoran Desert, but they can certainly sell something of the coastline. In the viewing room, I'll take that painting, and then I'll make those marketing decisions related to where I send them for marketability.
Well, I think it's interesting you said marketing decisions. I teach marketing to artists, and I get a fair amount of grief from time to time from those who think that the act of marketing is evil or manipulative in some way. And I look at it as, if you don't market, no one's ever going to find your work. And they're going to be happier if they do find it. How have you managed that fine balance between being the artist and not allowing the influences of marketing to make sure that you're not painting 12 little red barns because they're going to sell?
Well, that's a good question. Again, my strategy is simple in terms of just having those two separate, a business room and a creative room. Let's face it, to suggest that marketing is somehow evil is silly. That's as silly as suggesting that any degree of photography use in the creation of a painting is bad. That's nonsense. Quality is all that matters. We have to market. Ask any gallery that's trying to sell work. They have to market. We have to advertise. We have social networking and all this stuff that we have to do. It's very, very important. It's just you want to be careful that your marketing efforts don't overpower the creative things that you're trying to do and say in your studio.
So how do you deal with the issue when the gallery calls and says, that painting you did with the Blue Mountain and the S-curved river going through the foreground, could you get me 12 more like that?
Well, I go into my office and I open my checkbook and I see what the balance is, and then I make a that's a decision everybody has to make. I have artist friends who they're very talented and they want to make as much money as possible. And look at somebody like who was that artist that made all those prints? Thomas Kinkade. I think Thomas Kinkade's goal was to have as many of his works in as many homes as possible, and he wanted to be obviously as wealthy as possible. At least he was honest with that and the way he pursued it. So each artist. Go ahead. Have you read
the biography on him?
No, I haven't.
It's actually fascinating. I had a chance to meet him. I had dinner with him one time, and that's a story for another time. But I read the book. It's called The Billionaire Painter, and it talks about the struggles of his company and the struggles of his life and what he's gone through. And of course, we had a situation a long, long time ago where that company called us and they wanted to advertise in the magazine. And we knew that it would be just absolute death for us if we had Thomas Kinkade advertising. And Thomas actually loved plein air painting, but of course the things he showed were the syrupy little cottages with the bright lights. But we refused the advertising, and it did not make us very popular there. But we felt like that's what we needed to do to make sure we maintained credibility. But it is a fine line. So you were going to say, I stepped on you. I apologize.
No, you didn't. And that story right there is in direct relationship to what we're doing. You made a conscious decision of what the purity level, if you want to call that, of your magazine was going to be. And each artist has to call that shot on their own. And for somebody else to criticize them for it, I mean, sometimes it's obvious and it's over the top. But in regard to that specific artist, he was clear about it. And everybody needs, again, to call that shot on their own and decide what it is they're trying to say. I know some artists who are so good, and they're always on the edge of broke, but it's all about their work. If that's what you want, go ahead. You might have an ugly future if you continue to do that. So you've got to strategize on your own and make those calls and make the decisions. Personally, I think that I can make paintings that people will want to collect without compromising my standards. I've been lucky. I've been fortunate in that respect, but everybody else is going to have to call those shots on their own.
Well, everybody has to deal with it in their own way. When you're starting out in life, sometimes you have to do things that you don't always want to do. And I look at it and say, okay, I could go out and get a job cleaning toilets to get a base income, or I could paint a couple of paintings that will sell, that maybe aren't exactly what I'm in love with. But I'll get criticized for that too, because people want you to be pure. And the more I paint now, and I've known you now for probably about 15 years, I guess. And when I first started, I just I couldn't paint my way out of a box, and barely can today. But now I can focus a little bit more on quality. Back then, I didn't even know how to achieve it. So let's transition out of that. One of the things that I wanted to talk about is you've got this workshop coming up at the Plein Air Convention, and you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about the basics that everybody needs to master, and I'd like you to touch on some of those things. The one thing you said that's been kind of ringing in my head is that there are painters that were relatively accomplished painters that would come to your workshops, and after they took the workshop, they totally transformed the way they painted because there were certain basics they just didn't have down. Can you articulate that a little bit?
Well, what was happening is after years of teaching, I began to see the same issues and the same problems with everybody, not everybody, but most everybody that was coming to my classes. So I decided, all right, I got to bring these folks back indoors and talk about the fundamentals. So that's what I did. So I came back in, and we started dissecting these fundamentals of drawing, value, design, and color on a deeper level, so that when they went out into the field, they can look beyond just the overwhelming amount of information and really get to the meat and potatoes of what was in front of them. And the comment I made to you wasn't in regards specifically to well-accomplished painters. What happened was people were calling me and saying, I really wanted to take your outdoor class. Why are you teaching indoors as a landscape painter? And I would tell them, we're going to absolutely focus on the fundamentals and give you the necessary tools to do what you need to do when you go outdoors. And I would frequently hear, well, I already know the fundamentals. I already know all that. And I said, well, just come on. You won't regret it. Come on. And they come into the class, and I'd start going through those fundamentals and applying them visually to slide presentations and that kind of thing. And they would say, wow, okay, I guess I didn't quite understand them as much as I needed to. And so that's what I plan on focusing on.
Well, the other thing that I think is important about that, Matt, is that your time in life, your position where you are at the moment, impacts how you learn. And for instance, I think the very first workshop week I ever attended was at the PAPA, Plein Air Painters of America event in, I don't know, Colorado, Connecticut, or something like that. And I took one of your workshops. As a matter of fact, I think yours was the first I took. And I didn't have enough experience as a painter to appreciate and understand what you were teaching. I'm so excited about going back to it in April and sitting through it, because I know now I'll see things and understand things that I couldn't possibly have understood at that time.
Well, that's a good point. And oftentimes when I have conversations about art with my artist friends and I get their take on the fundamentals, their little twist on it, I pick something up. It's always fascinating for me to hear it through somebody else's life and painting experiences. So even if you think you know it all and you can't learn anymore, that's nonsense. I'll sit and have dinner with Lynn Schmiel or Ralph Oberg or Michael Lynch or Bill Anton or somebody like that, and just in the conversations you pick up little things that can really have a positive effect on your work. So you're thinking this is basic ABCs of what's going on, but really there's a lot of structural information in there that can be enormously beneficial. I remember at ASU, taking drawing classes where they would talk about the difference between line and form and couldn't articulate what that difference was. And as an art student, I'm thinking, what is that? It's, an 18, 19-year-old kid. And they couldn't tell me simply that, line is two-dimensional and form is three-dimensional. One is shape and one is perspective. And those are the kind of things that you really need to understand, so that when you're looking at a subject and you're seeing a wash or a road stretch off in the distance, all right, that applies more to linear perspective as it relates to drawing than it does shape or proportion. And if you're drawing something that's right at your feet and it's a series of just shapes, that's proportion. It's more two-dimensional. At least you're starting to analyze and dissect your subject to the point where you understand it as it relates to the fundamentals or those artistic elements that are so important to creating a good painting.
So let's talk about I think you said there are 4 categories of fundamentals. What were they again?
Drawing, value, design, and color.
Okay, so you touched a little bit on drawing. Let's talk about the others.
Value is kind of my deal. That's something that I've always appreciated in an effort to create that illusion of atmospheric perspective and strong sunlight that you frequently see out here in the Sonoran Desert. It's nothing more than the relative light to darkness of a particular color, and it's more important to see that than it is color, because it can help create a stronger design. The interesting thing, Eric, about color is of the 4 fundamentals, it's the only one you can eliminate and still have a great painting. And if you look at etchings, Zorn's etchings or Carl Rungus's etchings or the drawings of Maynard Dixon or the Gazai paintings, the black and white paintings that were intended for reproduction in the early 1900s, those were incredible paintings. Those artists would develop the surface on those, and they had everything but the artist's thumbprint color in them. They were still great. You can't eliminate the drawing, value, or design and have a good painting. Everything's going to fall apart. So the interesting thing is drawing, which is the most personal thing to each and every one of us in terms of the fundamentals, is the only thing you can eliminate and still have a great painting.
How so? It doesn't seem practical that you could eliminate drawing and still have a great painting.
You can. Again, I refer back to, I saw recently in one of the auction catalogs a Carl Rungus painting of a caribou. It was all black, white, and a series of grays. It was a beautiful painting, beautifully designed, the application of paint, the calligraphy, everything. But it was intended for a black and white reproduction in a book or a magazine. It was still a great painting. Just because you didn't have color doesn't mean it wasn't a great painting. Of course, that if he introduced his color sense, it would make it even that much better, but it didn't ruin it. Bad drawing will ruin it. Bad design will ruin it. Bad value harmonies will ruin it. And so understanding that is so important. again, value and designing with value and using it to create that illusion of natural light is a powerful tool.
Yeah, my first instructor made us paint value paintings from black and white photographs, Mapplethorpe and others. We had to copy them. And he said that if you want to have a really great ability as a painter, make sure that you just calendarize that once a year, on minimum, you do basically a values painting, one color values painting, because you just have to always go back to that basic to make sure that you never forget it.
Absolutely, and you ask any advanced painter, and they'll say the same thing. Eventually, you'll get a handle on it, so that you don't have to be so studious about it. Maybe go back and visit it every now and then, but it becomes, more ingrained in you, and it will substantially help you in understanding what a solid motif is and what isn't. Because usually, I don't know about you, but when I run into issues with a painting, I can trace it back to the beginning, and oftentimes I selected a motif or some reference that really wasn't a great idea to begin with, and that was the problem. So if I stop and analyze it in terms of drawing values on a color on a deeper level, then I can decide, all right, is this going to work as art as opposed to just a functional visual?
I was with C.W. Mundy last summer, and we were painting together, and I stopped and I said, I think I want to paint this scene. And he stopped and he looked at it and he squinted down. And he said, come on, let's get out of here. There's not enough value.
Well, he is a great painter. He is certainly a professional, a tremendous artist, and I would listen. I would have nailed him right there and say, explain that even more deeply.
Well, and he did. He basically said, squint down. There's only, it was kind of a gray, foggy day, and he said, there's really only two values. He said, you got to have at least three to make this work. That was his opinion.
Yeah, unless you're Emil Carlson.
Yeah.
Where he breaks it down to 1.5 values and then it makes up the difference with beautiful little color clicks.
Little subtleties.
Yeah. There's a common school of thought. Your painting's either about color or value. It can't be a real extreme example of both. If it's about color, simplify value. If it's about value, simplify color. And so most people say, yeah, well, I know these things, but what happened, Eric, is I consistently see when they got out in the field, they weren't applying it. So I thought either you know it and you're just not applying it, or you really don't know it, or you don't know that you don't know it. So bringing it back indoors, I've had great luck, and the students seem to really enjoy it, and now they have the tools to go out in the field. I mean, going outdoors to paint is that's a crazy thought for a beginning painter. It is such a complex thing for even an advanced painter to do. Everything is working against you. The wind, the changing light, the chaotic amount of information, the tourists walking by laughing at your painting, and everything in between. You better have some degree of understanding before you go out there, or what'll happen is you'll get so frustrated you'll never want to do it again.
Yeah, it's very easy to get seduced by so many different things that you want to either paint in, and you have to. I think you have to stop and ask yourself, what is it about this that's going to make a great painting? Because sometimes you fall in love with that scene, but it's not going to be a good painting.
You're right. You might fall in love with one element within a larger context, and when you really start to analyze the negative space or the elements around that focal point, you might realize there's not enough there to support that. And that can certainly be an issue too. Well,
so if I'm somebody who's been painting for a while, and I come to this workshop at the Plein Air Convention, what kind of transformation am I going to likely experience? What can you say based on people who have attended in the past? I know that's hard for you to say because you're a humble guy, but do you really see these people make big changes in their ability from those simple lessons? I know they're not simple; they're complicated, but
I do see results, and more importantly, I see a new level of excitement when they leave. And all I can do is say I am thankful that my classes fill, and for me that's a good sign. And I often see people who've taken 2 or 3 or 4 of my classes returning. And like you mentioned earlier, we're all at a different level for accepting information, and the more we go on, the more we realize. I think back to the things Jim Reynolds would say to me. Well, that's what he meant. Now I get it. But just reinforcing these fundamentals, applying them to visuals of both great masters' work and photographs that haven't been edited down or translated by these great painters, and applying them to the fundamentals, to me, is very important, because then you can start really physically putting your finger on what's being talked about, as opposed to just theory. So many of the artists I've talked to, they'll say something and I'll think about it. I won't quite understand it, but when they show me a visual, oh yeah, you pick it up like that. And that's what I try to do oftentimes in these classes.
I'm not anti-photograph by any stretch, and I know many artists who are, and I don't begrudge them that. But I find it very difficult to paint from a photograph now. I feel like I have to paint from a study because I just can't get the information from a photograph. Do you have a particular technique if you need to use a photograph? Obviously, there are times when you're in a fleeting moment and there's something you want to catch. I know I drive down the road with my camera going sometimes, and my wife is like, stop with the camera. But sometimes I want that information because it's an idea for a painting. But then when I try to paint from it, I find it very difficult, just because it feels flat to me, and the shadows are wrong, and they're too deep typically, and the colors don't feel right. Perspective feels a little bit off. How do you deal with a photograph?
That's a really great question. There's a whole school of thought that if you're working from photographs, that's the easy way out and you're cheating. The truth is, a photograph is full of almost nothing but lies, and there's so much misinformation and damaged information in there that if you can't back it up with an understanding of how natural light works and how natural perspective works, you're going to be in trouble, because the camera's blowing out light and shadows. It is altering plane compression and distortion in terms of perspective. It's full of light. The only way you can really use a photograph in a believable way is, in my opinion, is if you have a great amount of experience painting from direct observation, plein air painting. If you think you're going to be and I can mention names now, if you think you can be a great landscape painter and you only paint from photographs, you're not fooling anybody.
Yeah,
well, you're not fooling me. I've learned from painting in the desert that if you want to get the feel of natural light in your work, instead of looking for the contrast between light and shadows and the intensity of the highlights, look into the shadows and see what's going on. Because the greater the light source, the more reflected light you're going to see, and the reflected light happens by far more in the shadows than it does in the highlights. So if you open those shadows up, you're going to get this feeling of bathed light. I posted an image on social media not long ago of a Gunnar Wheatforce painting, a watercolor of a cliffside that was just glowing. I mean, he nailed it. And to be able to see something like that and learn from it is a valuable experience. But at the same time, photography is a great tool. That's all it is. It's a tool. It is what it is.
Yeah, well, they're all tools. And so you've studied with, you told me a couple of weeks ago that you sought out certain painters and went and studied with them. And I think from what I understand from you, you actually still do that. You still will go and try to learn something new from somebody else. Who are some of the people that you have really picked up a lot of great things from, and what did you pick up from them specifically?
Jane Reynolds was the first workshop I took. I was still at ASU, and I went to my instructors, and I said, listen, I have this great opportunity a week with them. Two of the instructors said, right on, take it. Two of them said, to unexcused absence, you're down a grade. I said, that's okay. It's Jim Reynolds. I'll see you in a week. And I went over that, and that week with him it just opened my eyes. I mean, it was such a valuable experience. First of all, he was one of the supreme colorists of our time, I believe. And he was also, his technique, his application of paint, the way he layered, the way he applied all that went so far beyond the subject, and it really transitioned him from a painter to a full-blown artist. And to listen to him talk and watch him paint and thumbed through his images and his paintings. We became friends, and we'd get together quite often before he passed away, and that was just a tremendous experience. I still think, when I think of color and colorists, which is one of my weakest points, color, I think of Jim Reynolds and the lectures he gave me because he was so good at it. But there was a point I had to say, come on, Jim. I mean, the stuff you're telling me, as it applies to your work, that is your specific DNA. That is so unique to you, James Reynolds, that can't come across. He says, but Matt, you can still go within these shadows and within the same value, alter color a little bit just to give it a little vibrancy. And he would show me in his paintings. It was a great experience. I also took workshops with Michael Lynch, who opened my eye to expressive calligraphy and brushwork and paint application, from thin washes to thick impasto. Clyde Aspavig, who's a tremendous naturalist, and his use of broken color and his connection to reality, but in a painterly way. I think he's one of the best out there. Skip Whitcomb, who is also a very painterly painter. They were all painterly guys, which I responded to, and they all became friends, and they were all a huge help to me. I've become friends with these guys, and we get together and paint from time to time, and that's where I learn now, Eric, is when I'm in the field painting with these guys as opposed to workshops. Not that I wouldn't take a workshop.
So other than Jim, who's now deceased, of deceased painters that you really love, who would you most love to sit down and talk to, and what would you ask him?
William Herbert Dutton. And how did you go from those early illustrations, grow from that to those more stylized paintings that he did later on in his career? If you look at a lightning bolt's going to hit me, but if you look at some of those early illustrations, compared to his later work, they were kind of crude, they were rough. But that work he was doing in the end, and that stylization that he was putting into those works, and that creative theatrical-like lighting was just pure design and art. I mean, my God, that man would put more thought into a negative sky hole in a tree than I would my entire painting, and the placement of it and the shape of it. They were brilliant. But I would like to know how that transition happened, and I kind of wonder if when he released himself from the illustrations and went purely into fine art, if that's when that progression started taking place.
Well, it'd be interesting to find that out, but there's no way to ask.
No, and you mentioned something earlier about you have to do what you do. You take on a job of house cleaning or whatever, or illustrations. I'm reading Stanley Booth's book on Sir Alfred Munnings right now, and about how he started early on as in a lithography studio and doing, prints for different things, and that's how he got started as a painter. Do whatever you have to do to get out there and get at it, and it will feed on itself.
So before we wrap it up, any final thoughts that you want to share with our friends?
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to the Plein Air Convention and what happens there. I would strongly suggest that everybody continue to get outdoors and eliminate all the things that make them not want to go outside. I could come up early on with every excuse possible not to get outside, and I started a list, and I started eliminating the things that supported those excuses one by one. And now it's some of the greatest moments of my professional life. My wife and Tracy and I spent the entire month of September on the road, traveling through Washington and Montana and Wyoming, and just had a great time, just painting outdoors the whole time. And it was the best month of the year. It was so fun to get out and do that. And as landscape painters, we absolutely fundamentally need to do that.
So in a typical week, do you go out pretty frequently?
No, I don't. I don't fracture up my week like that. What I'll do is I'll go out for a week or 2 weeks, and then I'll come in for a week or 2 weeks, or a block of time, however long it may be. This way I can really get into the groove of where I am. Right. However, I do structure my life so that I have the flexibility to do what I want to do. We got a deep snow here recently, so I took off and I went up on the rim to paint the snow. So if I look out the window and I think, I think I'm going to have better results out there today. And I'm off. I'm out into the field.
Well, it sounds like a great life.
You know, it is. I've been very, very fortunate. I still can't believe I'm living this life and I have this gig. You know, it's something.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for your time today, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in April at the Plein Air Convention. Matt has a optional pre-convention workshop that is limited to about 250 people. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I think we're already over half sold on that. And I think people are responding well, and it's pretty exciting. And Matt's also going to be on stage at the Plein Air Convention during one of the regular sessions, but this is a day and a half workshop that he'll be doing. And we have on the Plein Air Convention website all the details on that. I don't want to get into it too much now, but Matt, I really appreciate you taking the time today and helping us get a feel for you and some of your insights. And thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
Well, I think that was a great first interview. Matt Smith sure makes it easy. He's such a nice guy and very knowledgeable. This podcast, our first, was brought to you by Plein Air Magazine's Plein Air Convention. Remember, the early bird discount expires Valentine's Day, February 14th. If you want to know more, go to pleinairconvention.com. And I should mention that the magazine now, Plein Air Magazine, is now the best-selling representational art magazine at Barnes & Noble nationally. So drop on by and pick one up, Plein Air Magazine, or you can get a bi-monthly subscription for about half the price of the newsstand by going to pleinairmagazine.com. And, of course, we've got a whole community for painters at outdoorpainter.com. And so much more. Well, this has been fun. Let's do it again sometime. As a matter of fact, let's do it next week. I'll see you then. Remember, tell your friends and subscribe to the podcast so that you automatically get it. I am Eric Rhodes, publisher and founder of Plein Air Magazine. And remember, it's a big world out there, so go paint it. Bye now.